I've often felt that I'm 10 or 15 years behind, I don't know, some of my peers or other people my age. I didn't go to college for art, but I guess one of the things that I feel now is that I've been doing it for such a long time. Some of the things that I've lacked in the past, I'm starting to be able to overcome them.
Noé Montes, welcome to Bullseye. I'm so happy to see you, so happy to have you here, and congratulations on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show.
How did you find photography?
After high school, I got a degree in electronics. So at the time I was working as an electronic repair person for a company that made lasers. I was around 20 years old.
And this was an associate's degree and agricultural lasers.
That's right. So
I want to set the context here.
Yeah, you're right. So lasers are used in land leveling and in agriculture and construction. The lasers aren't doing any cutting or anything. They are used as a reference.
Right.
So that's the kind of equipment that I was working on. This was in Yuma, Arizona, where I lived at the time. I was working in that field. I was 20 years old. After about a year, I was like, oh my God, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Like, I don't really think I can do that. And I had always had an interest in art ever since I was young, but the environment that I grew up in, it wasn't something that was nurtured or encouraged for no other reason that, it just wasn't like that. I didn't know any artists, anything like that, but I always had an interest in it. So I started taking community college classes after work at the local community college in Yuma. I took a painting class. I took, a jazz appreciation class. I just started taking classes of things that I had an interest in. And then I took a photography class, and I immediately really took to it. I really liked it. It was an analog photo class, so we were, developing film and making prints by hand with chemistry. I just really loved it. I would spend, the entire night. I'd go into the dark room at 8 p.m. and come out like at 3 a.m. and not realize that all that time had passed. And then that was just making the pictures, and taking the pictures was also really interesting to me. So that's kind of how I came to photography.
How did you come to think of it as something you could do for a living?
That has been a really kind of like long and journey that has taken many steps and leaps of faith, I guess. I just kept doing it. I kept doing it over decades, doing different kinds of work, and then eventually moving further and further into, practicing photography, doing photography as work and as a creative practice. That involved, learning Photoshop and doing digital editing and processing for other companies, for stock agencies, etc. And also working here in Hollywood as a photography assistant, a production assistant, working in production here in Los Angeles. And eventually kind of figuring out how I could be in the world as a photographer in a way that worked for me, both financially and as well as being able to balance all the other things in my life, my relationships and my family and all of these things.
I mean, you're talking about both having become an artist as a 20-year-old 30, 35 years ago, and also really starting your career as an artist as a 40-year-old 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I guess I'm saying that there's not a lot of people who come on this show who I would consider to be early career artists who are also people in their 50s.
I've often felt that I'm about 10 or 15 years in terms of my career as an artist behind what I don't know, some of my peers or other people my age that have gotten here in a different way through education. I didn't go to college for art, but I guess one of the things that I feel now is that I've been doing it for such a long time that some of the things that I've lacked in the past in terms of like becoming a successful artist, I'm starting to be able to overcome them just by having been making art for so long, doing it rigorously, conscientiously, and honestly.
One of the first big projects that you did as, a conscious choice to make a capital A art was a body of work called Cuyama. And there's a number of pictures from that project that are at the Riverside Art Museum. This was 10, 15 years ago now. Tell me about where Cuyama is and what drew you to that place.
The Cuyama Valley is a small agricultural valley. It's a rural community that is located roughly between where Bakersfield is and Santa Maria, which is north of Los Angeles, for about 2.5 hours. It's kind of hidden in a little pocket, in between some mountains there. I initially started working there with a nonprofit organization called the Blue Sky Center. And in fact, I'm still working with the Blue Sky Center there. I'm still working and collaborating with them there in the valley. But at the time, the Blue Sky Center was just starting out. Like the organization had just been seed funded, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to exist, what their relationship to the community was. And their community was, made up of a couple of different demographics. One of them was the farmworker community, because it is a valley that has a lot of commercial agriculture. There are a lot of farm workers there that are immigrants from Mexico, from different states in Mexico.
What in your own life connected you to farm worker communities in California?
I actually grew up in a family of farm workers. I worked as a farm worker myself. My parents are both from the state of Michoacan in Mexico. They came here in the early 70s to work in the fields, and orchards of California. And more specifically, our family, my siblings and my parents, but also our extended family, lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, we were migrant farm workers, which means that we moved around following harvests. We moved on average every 6 months. We would move to a different place in the state of California, sometimes down to Arizona because there's citrus and lettuce there. So just following different harvests of fruits and vegetables.
Is that cycle still sort of in your mind?
It is, actually. It definitely is. Sometimes I've been here in LA for 25 years now. And I'll go to the farmer's market and I'll see cherries, and my mind immediately says, oh, it's May. I know when the different crops are harvested. From that's why I grew up for my entire childhood and adolescence. I started actually working in the fields myself, probably somewhere between around 8 years old. And then I did that into my teen years until I got my first non-farm working job, which was at Kmart in Lodi, California.
Did you work alongside both your parents?
We did. We all worked together until I was 12 years old. And when I was 12 years old, I looked old enough that I was able to work under my own name and get my own paycheck. But, it still went into my family's, finances.
So your parents were paid by what they harvested. And so if you were working alongside them, you could, effectively throw it in their basket.
That's right. It's called a contract or per unit work. And yeah, you could all kind of pitch into the same buckets or bins. Sometimes we picked pairs in big bins, but there was that kind of work. And then there was also hourly work. And that's where I could work under my own name at that age and draw my own paycheck.
Did your parents have status from being in the Bracero program or something like that?
My dad initially came to the U.S. as a bracero, like for a very short period. I think he was a bracero at the very tail end of that program.
This was a program to give legal immigration status to migrant farm workers who were working seasonally in the United States. So
that's right. And the government worked with the farmers here in the United States to contract. So they would ask for a certain number of people that they needed for this particular period of time. And then, the governments working together would bring over those people that were being requested. So yeah, that was actually the way a lot of Mexican people, specifically men, came to the United States to work initially. Now we're here, now we're everywhere. All the second and third generations of those families.
You've photographed farm worker communities in Cuyama, California, and in the Coachella Valley in California, both of which are sort of a few hours from Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
When you started on those projects, what did you want to do that was different from other photographs and artworks that you had seen about farm workers?
Well, one thing that was interesting is that it took me quite a bit of time to come around to want to make work about farm workers. And
because you were self-conscious about it?
Because I was self-conscious about it, because I had certain ideas about myself as an artist and didn't want to be put in a box as like this kind of artist, or that, only works in these themes, etc. Something that I think I've worked out to some degree, still working out. But when I did eventually come to work with intention on a project about farm workers, one of the important ideas that I was working with was that I did not want to represent farm workers in the ways that I had seen them represented before visually, which was almost anonymously. Like I often describe it as bultos in a field, which means just shapes, like bent over shapes in a field. So at the time, farm workers, I felt, were portrayed in just a couple of different ways. One of them was just as almost as an abstraction, as these people who are out here who pick our food, etc., or as victims of some social injustice, which is true, that is the case. It seemed always from a distance, right? And I felt that I had the opportunity, given the fact that I was from that community, to reframe, the narrative. So what I did was I spent a long time interviewing people, talking to them in the Coachella Valley and also in the Cuyama Valley, getting to know their stories. And then what emerged from all those conversations was the realization that there is a lot of leadership in that community. And so that's what I kind of focused on. The people from the community that were farm workers themselves, or are from farm worker families that have over time emerged as leaders in that community in a variety of different ways. And of course, photographing them very close up. The portraits are specifically about those people and their stories, not so much about just the community in a broad sense.
You've done a lot of work for civic institutions in Los Angeles. One of them is the police department.
Mm-hmm.
You took portraits of police officers and shot out of a helicopter as well.
An LAPD helicopter, yeah.
What did you learn from taking pictures of police officers?
Well, one thing is that police officers take direction really well. I guess it's part of the military culture, right? If they do exactly what you tell them to do. And in this case, I was put in a position of power over them by their superiors because they were called in to be part of this photo shoot. But I mean, more than that, But what I learned about police officers, what I think about in terms of the experience of working with the LAPD, I've actually been called out for having done that. And it has become a really interesting, part of my experience. It's something that I'm still thinking about and probably going to do some work around, create some work around that experience. But at the time, I was trying to pay my bills. I had a 2-year-old living in a little Hollywood bungalow, just figuring out how to be a photographer in the world. Had an opportunity through a friend to work for the LAPD. It is actually the LAPD Foundation, which was the fundraising arm of the LAPD. That's who I worked for at the time. I did several shoots for them over the years. So there's much to think about.
I would imagine that part of the challenge of doing it is, as someone who is in a position where in your day-to-day life you might have discomfort about the police, like a lot of people in cities do, a lot of people not in cities as well. It is a challenge to bring to bear your project to look at people squarely and honestly when you might go into it more uncomfortable, Yeah. To be able to represent them directly is in some ways a greater challenge when you are worried about police officers than it is when you are looking at somebody in a community like the one that you grew up in, that you recognize and see as, if this person comes off well, I feel great because they're, being celebrated and et cetera, right? Like there's a little more challenge in seeing someone as a human being who you're worried about going in.
Do you mean to represent the police officers in an honest way? Well, one of the interesting aspects of that work was that it was work for hire. So I was also had the responsibility to the client, in a sense, of making them, portraying them in the way that they want.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it. Another aspect of my relationship to police is that, well, a couple of things. One is that I've actually been stopped and held at gunpoint by police for no reason. Driving my own car, pulled over, made to get out, lie on the ground, no reason. Just like, why did you guys do that? Oh, we had a report of a stolen car. I'm like, this is my car. So I've had that experience of abuse.
Here in Los Angeles?
No, in Yuma, in Arizona, growing up. And also of other police just exercising their power in ways that are unfair, abusive. But also growing up in a home where there was a lot of violence, I had the experience of police coming to my home and putting a stop to that violence. So, I mean, it's so complex.
Will you tell me about somebody who you took a portrait photograph of, who is in the exhibition that's up right now at the Riverside Art Museum?
There's a young man in one of the photographs. His name is Castulo Estrada. And he is from the Coachella Valley. His story, I like his story specifically because it is a story of 3 different generations of men in his family that have been farm workers. Castulo's grandfather, his name is Onesimo, and he came from the state of Guerrero in Mexico as a bracero, actually, like in the early in the bracero program. Came to the United States to work in the fields. So his son Jeronimo got a college education and tried to work in his field. It was hard. Started coming to the U.S. to work in the fields, even though he, had, like I said, a college education. That was kind of his option in terms of like just making a living and raising a family. So he started coming to the U.S., eventually settled in the Coachella Valley. After, one of the things that's interesting, but also not uncommon of Jeronimo's story, is that he used to walk from the Mexican border to the Coachella Valley. He used to walk. It's over 100 miles, and he did this many times. It was just kind of part of his
This is like a week or two of walking.
part of his journey to get to where he needed to go. That was normal for him and for others like him. But eventually he settled in the Coachella Valley in the town of Indio and raised his family. So then Castulo, the young man who I'm talking about, whose photograph is in the exhibition, he is Geronimo's son. And Castulo grew up in the Coachella Valley, got an education, went to college, studied engineering, and then after college went back to the Coachella Valley to live and to work there. Started working in government, and now he is, I think he's a vice president of the board of the Coachella Valley Water District. He is in a position where he is able to be part of the process of making decisions about how resources are allocated to the communities of the Coachella Valley, including the farmworker community from which he came. So that process of progress over generations, and then these later generations looking back and helping the community that they came from, is a really beautiful story and a really interesting story. But beyond that, it also is a story of the United States. Like, the work that Castello now does is to create infrastructure, is in part to create infrastructure in the Coachella Valley that is then becomes vital to the economy of the Coachella Valley, of the state of California, of the country of the United States. So I like that story and those connections,
Are they the family that were at the opening?
In fact, they came to the opening. That's right. And that's another really gratifying aspect of this work, is that you're able to take people's stories and present them, elevate them, and then to see those people in the space is really cool. It's really, it's a way to honor them, and it's really cool.
I clocked. I was standing in the room, saw everyone gathering around the picture, and it took me a minute to clock what was going on. And, everybody was in their Sunday best.
Yeah.
And
the grandchildren were there now, right? So Castulo's children were there. And so, we had 4 generations of that family at the opening. And that was amazing. Yeah.
And you could see the pride of being so honestly represented for that family.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Yeah.
I almost started crying looking at them. They were all just, doing the kind of thing that you would do if everybody went to a grandchild's, high school theater production of Rent. But it was so beautiful to see everybody.
Yeah. I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to do things like this, to be honest.
I grew up in a context where I was surrounded by Mexican and Mexican-American art. My mom worked at the Mexican Museum in San Francisco as a docent for a number of years when I was a kid. Mexican Museum, mostly Mexican art. And I lived in the Mission in San Francisco, where I walked past the Mission Cultural Center and La Raza Graphics, 5 days a week. You know what I mean? And was surrounded by murals, mostly painted by Mexican-American artists. And I grew up loving that stuff, right? Especially because so many of the graphic things, it's easy to understand when you're a kid because they're about impact,
Yeah.
Those are very specific worlds of art.
Mm-hmm.
Chicano art, Mexican-American art is a very specific world that kind of emerged from a cultural movement in the 70s-ish, 60s and 70s. Those are all things, both that Chicano art movement and the sort of more Mexican art are things that you've lived and worked a little bit apart from.
It's true.
Tell me I know that you love many of those things, but tell me what your discomfort was with those worlds and those kind of labels and categories.
Wow. So that's I feel, okay. I feel like I have to think about this carefully because it's a complex question, and I've only come to learn about and appreciate Chicano art actually more recently, and I have a great appreciation for it. But for a long time, it's true that it was something that I kind of felt apart from, both, I guess, circumstantially and intentionally. And my discomfort with it was that it seemed very cliched to me, and it seemed like it was a friend of mine once described Plaza Olvera, which is this place here in Los Angeles that is like a important place in terms of Mexican history in the city of Los Angeles. He said he said of it once, he's like, it's that place where they dance around the hat. And I totally knew what he meant. It was like this representation of Mexican culture and Mexican people in a way that was very centered folkloric traditions, a celebration of the culture of Mexican culture. And it's very complicated for me because my experience of Mexican culture, of growing up as a Chicano, or of growing up in a Mexican family in the United States, was actually very troubled. Like there was a lot of challenges, both in my own home and in my environment, right? I mean, we were very poor, and we were moving around. Sometimes we'd live in our car, and in addition to that, the family dynamics in our home were, in essence, ruled by the fact that my dad had a severe drinking problem, and there was violence in the home, all these things. So I felt like there was this disconnect between the celebration of Mexican people and Mexican culture and my own experience of it, right? And then there's also the fact that growing up in the United States, especially at the time that I grew up in, which was the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's a certain amount of, I guess, criticism of culture, of your culture, of other cultures, that I internalized, right? So sometimes it would make me embarrassed. That I know that sounds terrible. These are things that I could work on in therapy for the rest of my life. But yeah, I a lot of my initial influences in terms of art and creativity weren't Chicano movement or Mexican culture, art and practices. I'm finding a relationship to it that is working for me.
The other thing that occurred to me is, Chicano art in particular is often a self-conscious counter-narrative, right? Like it's about the Chicano experience in the United States is about asserting their own experience, not being ignored and subsumed into everything else.
And
so
presence. Yeah.
And because of that, and the fact that it so often has roots in revolutionary art, it can get pretty invested in Aslan and, Aztec dancers and things that project power, Your work is so much about removing the hagiographic elements of telling the story of people,
Yeah. It goes back to, I think, a little bit of to accept things as they are, stripping images down to strictly what is necessary. And that's hard because everything means everything nowadays, right? So everything is a symbol or a metaphor for something else. So you almost have to, like, it's harder to make an authentic, honest image than it is to overlay some idea on it. So yeah, I think that's part of the process.
Like, you could dress somebody up as an Aztec warrior, borrow some symbol
Yeah.
that has a lot of power and is really cool.
Yeah.
And conveys a really powerful message because of its symbolic associations, and choose not to.
And light it in a way that, is heroic, and find a very specific setting that, adds to the narrative, just to put all these ideas into it, right? But I actually have a photograph of that I just printed for someone recently of an Aztec dancer, but it is a photograph of this young woman dressed as an Aztec dancer, and her costume is actually not fully like kosher, I guess, in the sense that, it doesn't have all the correct things. It's kind of put together in a few different pieces from a couple of different types of material, etc. And she's dancing in a space, and behind her through the window you can see the like big sign of a strip mall, and it shows all the shops that are in that strip mall, and there's a food for less, and there's like, an auto insurance place and all these things. And I love that. I love that you're taking this symbol that could be what you were just describing, right? A reference to, to resistance and power through indigenous knowledge, which I'm all for, by the way. But putting it in a context that is actually something, I don't know, to me, much more interesting, because now the conversation is moving forward. It's just not just going back. So yeah, again, accepting, I think, of what things are and how they are is a really good goal.
With a retrospective solo show in a major art museum in your early 50s, do you feel within yourself like you have earned a place as a professional artist?
Yes, I do. At the same time, in terms of my understanding of my development as an artist, I feel like I'm just starting. And that's a good thing.
Noé Montes, thank you for your time. Congratulations on the exhibition. And I think that I admire your art making so much, and I love you so much, and I'm grateful to get to talk to you here.
I am so happy that we had this conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.